Hello, I'm Bob Ackerman, editor-in-chief of Signal Magazine, and welcome to our Signal Media executive interview. Our guest today is Chris Thomas, IT communications strategist, systems architect at Dell Technologies. Chris, welcome.
Hey, how's it going, Bob?
Going well with me, and I hope with you. I'd like to ask you about 5G. What are some of the challenges associated with taking advantage of 5G, and what concerns are you hearing from IT leaders?
So with 5G, right, that's kind of a loaded question, right? We've heard a lot of different things. One of the biggest aspects of 5G is the promise of the high speed, which that's true. But it also is kind of the catalyst technology that encompasses all of the transformations that we've done over the last decade within our IT and data center areas. This includes virtualization, also the proliferation of DevOps, DevSecOps, being able to leverage what we've done in a multi-cloud environment. Now, all these things have to be taken into consideration as we move into a data driven era. Now, with that aspect, obviously, that also means you're pulling all of those security controls as well that come into context with those different technology trends.
Well, let's look at what the Defense Department has to deal with. What do DoD organizations need to know and do as they plan and consider how to build 5G frameworks to enable rapid data driven decision making?
So for the DoD, we're going through the policies now, right? And this organization with the NCCOE is starting looking at cybersecurity. The DoD has also made a substantial investment as it pertains to tranche activities, right? To stimulate and do the research within labs for controlled use cases. Now, as a part of that, right, you have to understand with 5G, there's three different tiers for as from a spectrum standpoint to generalize it. You have your low band, which I guess the easiest way to understand that would that be traditional, similar to what we're doing today with 4G. You have your mid band, which is typically going to be the workload. This includes CBRS, which is Citizens Broadband Radio Service. Now, that is where we're doing a lot of dynamic spectrum sharing allocation. And then you have what, and this falls into that category, right, for sub six, which I know people have heard that a few times. And then beyond that, you have your high band, right? Your high band is where that millimeter wave, when you're talking those massive speed transfer rates, 10 gigabits per second, 20 gigabits per second, that's going to fall into there. Um, and the other piece that I would want everyone to understand, right, is 5G is backwards compatible. So everything that we've learned over time in the evolution of LTE from 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G encompasses all that and more and moves us into a disaggregated RAN type of architecture.
Mhm. Okay, now that we've addressed that, what about security? What are the security considerations as agencies adopt 5G and enable more edge computing?
So moving and kind of continuing that same talk track, moving to this edge compute aspect, we figured out from a cloud mantra that once you start looking at the actual data, how the data is consumed, how the data is disseminated, to be able to do that effectively, you're going to need edge computing. I cannot do everything in the cloud, especially you start looking at how you're going to leverage AI and machine learning. So you have your near edge, your far edge, and realistically, there's probably 5 to 7 different edge locations that you can discuss. Taking into all those security concerns and control mechanisms for the different type of data sets or the different type of data consumption models that you may be leveraging. 5G is how these things are going to be connected, right, and being consumed. So I have to take that in consideration as I look at what type of endpoint I'm using, what type of data they're consuming, where it's being hosted at, right? You start thinking about a multi-cloud solution set. Well, now I have to consider a multi-cloud supported mobile edge compute aspect as a part of my 5G architecture. And so I think walking through all of those details will be something that's going to be key for the DoD to take into consideration from a security standpoint.
Mhm. If I may ask a follow up, we're talking a lot about service to the edge. How will DoD's security approaches have to change with the advent of 5G?
So it's going to have to, I believe that's a great question. I believe the DoD is going to have to take a very holistic approach to this, right? the blurred lines, and we've seen it within the data centers already, right? We went from, and I'm a traditional network communications person, but over the years, right, the network team also became part of your security team in some cases. And so your roles and responsibilities changed in technology over the years to where it's you have to kind of know the complementary technologies. So what I'm predicting is with that change, you're going to have enterprise architects or chief engineers that kind of understand each one of the different facets of the technology that will be encompassed to get the mission completed, whether or not that's cloud, edge computing, your database administrators, your Windows domains, all those things have to be taken into consideration in a data-driven solution set.
Understood. How does the Defense Department's enterprise IT environment, the traditional data center and multi-cloud ecosystem, need to evolve alongside 5G deployment to move digital transformation forward?
So I think that evolution has already started. The biggest change has been to the telecom market to also make those transitions. But I do believe in that same context of they're going to be very blurred lines for the roles and responsibilities. Everyone is going to have to work and talk to each other. You're not going to be able to just assume that the transport of the data will be done effectively by the other team. You're going to have to walk through how that data will be stored, transported, and processed, right? As we start to look at AI and machine learning as well, those things need to be taken into account in a DevOps type of world.
Follow up, talking about the cloud, the multi-cloud ecosystem, as I called it a moment ago. We're going to be relying more on the cloud for security. That is, we're going to be embedding security more into this cloud model because of both the new model and 5G.
Most definitely. Security has to be intrinsic as a part of your solution. You have to think security first. It can't be, I guess you'd say in our early 90s and 2000, right? It was you bought a box and you just layered it on and added, well, what do I need? I bought a firewall, and then I bought a firewall for special purpose and a load balancer. Well, now you've seen the consolidation of that into those are just virtual functions, whether or not they're running in a container or they're just a virtual network function on your network. So I think that transformation is going to continue and it's going to start to be embedded as a part of these platforms as we move to this service-based architecture.
Okay. Given the opportunity and nature of the technology, what types of things are needed to drive adoption? I'm thinking in terms of COEs, training, pilot projects, innovation challenges.
So I believe, right, we're going to have to stimulate. It's very seldom that you'll find, I guess you'd say, technicians that are familiar with the broad gamut of, okay, this person is familiar and comfortable with working on and designing cloud infrastructure, storage, the compute aspect, DevOps, machine learning. So I think that transformation from the workforce and being comfortable with not being particularly specialized in one general area, that's going to be a huge investment, as well as industry and leaders across the space are also going to have to make investments of doing the research and development. I think the DoD has done a great job with these charge activity of investing the money to stimulate, to figure out how well does this technology and what is our concepts, our policies need to be to order to be able to use this in both forward deployed mission critical applications, looking at deployment of what does 5G and CFFC look like, as well as just your day-to-day routine with smart warehouse, AI, machine learning, for virtual reality and augmented reality type of use cases. So the investment in the joint collaboration between both industry and the DoD and the government, that is going to have to continue as we move forward to really roll this out.
A follow-up on that, you touched upon the workforce situation. 5G is going to require a lot of different technologies being set up to make it work, not just the same kind of transponder on top of the cell tower that we had with 4G. What does that mean in terms of the workforce and the expertise we'll need to do that?
So I think the workforce is going to have to keep an open mind for sure. We're going to see a paradigm shift here. You're going to see the proliferation of private LTE networks come into as you look at IoT space. From a device standpoint, you're now seeing the introduction of eSIMs. And I guess the simplest way for me to equate that would be consider it in the same fashion that we deploy X509 certificates to devices today. You would have an electronic SIM that allows you to have both your private LTE network on the device as well as your public carrier network access on the device. And so this gets into where you start looking at geofencing. If I'm at work as a part of my enterprise, I'm connected to the enterprise's private LTE network. However, once I go to my car and I leave the facility, I'm now back on my provider network, whether or not that's AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, so on and so forth. And I think that's going to be a huge paradigm shift because you now, as we touched on earlier, also have to consider the security implications behind that. So you see where the convoluted aspect of all of these technologies are coming together and have to have a very tight synchronization as a part of it.
Let me extend that one step further. What does this mean for maintenance of the network as these different components come into play? And you have workforce expertise for that.
So I think it's going to come in that synchronization, right? The collaboration amongst all of the teams and making sure that all parties are aware of what services are going to be impacted by the maintenance window. I think as we think about the paradigm shift that's occurred with relation to critical infrastructure and what we considered critical infrastructure 10 years ago versus if you were to ask, your grandchild or your kids in your home, what's critical infrastructure, what's required? Communications would be a part of it. Imagine telling a 16-year-old that you're going to take them somewhere that there is no internet service for over a week, right? They'll take the camping trip, but if you tell them it's going to be a 2-week or a month visit and they're going to have no internet, no social media, I don't know if I want to be in the room when that happens, but I can't see it going well, right? So I think that collaboration is going to be key from a paradigm shift of communications is now critical infrastructure. We're going to have smart meters that are tied to our electronics, our water systems. We're going to have it for the street lights, right? We're seeing smart cities come up, right? Look at Link New York, right? They have sensors in the trash cans to improve the efficiencies of when the actual trash trucks run through the city to minimize the impact, right? Something so simple has a huge impact to just day-to-day commutes within New York City with a $10 sensor being installed on a trash can to let you know when it's almost full to send someone to pick it up.
Okay, let's swing back to DoD. Well, actually, this would probably apply to 5G as a whole. My question simply is, what is needed from industry partners?
So I think the biggest thing that we have to do, and we talked and touched on CBRS earlier. For CBRS, there's some required infrastructure that has to be in place in coordination. And I know that NTIA and SEC are actively working on this as well as with some of the DoD leaders. So with private LTE and CBRS are leveraging that, you require both your SAS, so your spectrum access system, as well as your ESC, right? So the environmental central control systems. Now, these ESCs have to be deployed. And today, those have not been widely deployed, right? Even in our larger cities. So that investment is going to have to be made by companies in order for things to move forward and to really be able to leverage CBRS as a part of the private LTE network. So that's going to be one investment that has to be made across the US. I think the other piece of it will also be industry helping with that workforce training aspect. And some companies have already started programs to assist with that on both a state and city level. So I think that that's going to also have to continue.
A follow-up, the Defense Department is taking an active role in 5G construction at its base facilities, whereas before it just allowed 4G to be built by the telecom companies. Do you see a different relationship building between the Defense Department and industry partners with what industry can bring to DoD?
So I do believe that that relationship is definitely changing, right? With the aspect of 5G bringing in the small cell deployments, the DoD is starting to investigate, okay, can I put the connectivity as close as possible to the warfighter? Can I put it where I actually need it versus just a blanket statement of, okay, best effort? And I think with that collaboration, which, right, as we said, all the other technologies that are now associated, you're talking to your Microsofts or your Googles or in collaboration with AT&T as to how do I get this data set that's hosted in the cloud next to that warfighter, whether or not that's a wearable, whether or not that's a distributed sensor network. So I think that's going to have to continue in order to address the mission needs as we move forward. Um, and I think that that collaboration right now, what we're seeing with the tranches as well as some of the other research projects, is really firming that up to where industries walk in lockstep with DoD leaders.
All right, then. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for your insight and observations. To the audience, I want to thank you for viewing. You've been watching Chris Thomas of Dell, and this has been a Signal Media Executive video. Thank you again, and good day.